No. I can't. I can't get out.
I only made one stupid comment. I saw that powerful man crossing the ballroom, everyone parting to make way as if they were afraid to breathe near him, and I let the wrong sentence slip at the worst possible moment. Who would want a mobster who's already past his prime? The problem is that he heard. When I tried to run, he cut off my path, put his hand on the wall beside my face, and looked at me as if I had just challenged the most dangerous man in Chicago. I turned red, speechless, no way out. And then I discovered that provoking Orsino Valconti could be the most dangerous mistake, or the beginning of everything. Chapter 1. Past my prime. My aunt's cough started before the sun. I recognized the sound through the bedroom wall, that dry wheeze that came with the first hours of morning and never asked permission. I got up quickly, fixed my hair with my fingers, and crossed the short hallway of the small house I'd been supporting on my own since Nonna got sick. The door to Nonna Talia's bedroom was cracked open, and the gray Saturday light seeped through the frayed curtain of the window, casting a long shadow over the worn wooden floor. "Nonna, did you take your medicine last night?" I asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. She opened just one eye, the other still buried in the pillow. She drew in air like someone rationing every ounce of breath. "I took it, my love. Took it and still dreamed about your father, imagine that. God spare me from 2 punishments in one night." I laughed softly. Despite the hour, despite the exhaustion, despite the tightness in my chest that the mention of my father always brought without asking permission. I kissed her forehead, felt the warm, dry skin against my lips, the chamomile scent of the soap she insisted on using even when I bought another, more expensive one, which sat wrapped in the bathroom unopened. "I'm going to work. Fancy wedding at the Bella Verde, that bride I told you about. The spoiled one? The spoiled one." Nonna Talia stretched out her thin hand and squeezed mine with a strength that didn't match the body she'd become over the last 2 years, as if the illness had shrunk everything except her stubbornness. "Charge a lot, and don't let anyone talk down to you, you hear? If they do, you talk back. Your mouth was always your best inheritance." I tucked the words away with the rest of what I carried inside before leaving. I grabbed the makeup case from the living room, checked the zipper twice, counted the brushes a 3rd time. I always counted 3 times when I was nervous, and that morning I was, because the fee from that one wedding covered Nonna Celia's medicine for 2 whole months. I couldn't mess up, couldn't be late, couldn't drop a pallet in the marble bathroom of a bride who treated staff like scenery. The rental car waited out front. I set the case on the passenger seat with the care of someone carrying a sleeping child, backed out, and prayed the Saturday traffic would cooperate. It didn't. It never cooperated, and I knew that. And even so, I always left with the time margin a perfect day would require. I arrived at the Bella Verde Hotel 11 minutes late, enough for the bride's mother to look at me the way you look at a roach in the kitchen of an expensive restaurant. "You're late." I apologize. The traffic in the area isn't my problem. It's yours." I swallowed the reply Nonna Celia would have approved and smiled my best service provider smile, the one I'd practiced in front of the mirror until it became unrecognizable as effort. The bride's mother spun on her heels and vanished toward the bar without waiting for an answer, and I followed one of the coordinators to the elevator. The bride's suite was on the 8th floor, and the elevator rose packed with expensive perfume and shrill voices. Bridesmaids arguing about shoes, a florist fighting with her phone, someone crying for a reason no one would tell me. Adalgisa Vernon was sitting in a white robe in front of the lit mirror, her hair still wet, her face turned toward her own image like someone searching for a flaw where none exists. She raised her eyes to me in the reflection. She didn't smile. "Are you the makeup artist?" "I am. Mireia Belafonte." "I didn't ask your name." I pulled up the stool, set up the case on the glass sideboard, breathed deeply through my nose. An hour and a half of work, the fee in my pocket, the exit door in the same place it had always been. That was all that mattered. I worked in silence. Adalgisa complained about the foundation, too light. We changed it. Complained about the eyeliner, too thick. I redid it. Complained about the lipstick, not red enough. We applied the darkest one in the palette, and she told me to take it off, making a grimace that cost more than I'd earned that morning. In the end, we were left with the lipstick I'd suggested at the start, and she looked at her own reflection as if she'd invented the color herself. It'll do. I packed up slowly, arranging each brush back in place with more attention than necessary, just to have something to focus my eyes on. The bridesmaids' hands circled around. No one offered water. No one asked if I wanted to sit. One of them in particular, blonde hair pulled into a low bun, champagne-colored silk dress that must have cost more than my rent, wouldn't stop circling the bride's neck with outstretched fingers. Adalgi, oh, let me see that necklace up close, my God. Later, Ottilie. Later. I registered the name without meaning to. Ottilie. There are people you memorize without understanding why, and only later do you understand that your brain was paying more attention than you were. The coordinator pushed us into the main ballroom before 2 p.m. The rule was that the bride would stay in a private anteroom until the time of her entrance, and I'd stay nearby for any last-minute touch-ups. I took the case with me, settled into a burgundy velvet armchair in the corner of the ballroom, accepted the glass of water someone finally remembered to offer. The ballroom was a theater of gold, columns tall as sentinels, a heavy chandelier scattering light in fragments across the ceiling, arrangements of white flowers so dense the sweet scent settled in the air like something solid. Guests arrived in waves of perfume and jewels, and I became part of the furniture, the girl in the black blazer sitting in the corner, eyes down, phone in hand, faking existence. It was in that waiting silence that I heard it. 3 women passed near my armchair, glasses of champagne balanced on their fingers with that lightness that only comes from lots of practice, heads tilted toward each other like conspirators in a soap opera. Mr. Valcanti, imagine, still thinks all he has to do is walk into a room to become the talk of it. That charm is long gone, sweetheart. A man that age should stop looking at the young girls. He should stop looking at himself in the mirror, that's what. Restrained laughter, the kind that only exists between women who know they're being cruel and enjoy it. I didn't look at who they were. I didn't look around. My brain, tired, offended by the whole morning, squeezed by the pharmacy bill waiting on top of the fridge at home, let the sentence slip before I authorized it. Who would want a mobster who's already past his prime? I said it quietly to myself, quietly into the glass of water I was raising to drink. Quiet, but not quite quiet enough. An older woman passing by with her husband turned her face in my direction with a speed that startled me. The 3 conspirators froze, and one of them gripped her glass hard enough to make a sound against the rim. A waitress stopped serving a meter away from me, the tray suspended in the air. The pianist, at the back of the ballroom, ended a musical phrase early, and the next one took half a second longer to begin. That half second that filled the silence with something very much like fear. An entire ballroom doesn't fall silent by accident. I raised my eyes slowly, like someone trying not to be seen by their own movement. On the other side, leaning against one of the golden columns with the calm of someone who'd rented the place by his own right, stood a man in a black suit and shirt of the same color. Tall. Broad shoulders the cut of his jacket didn't try to hide. On the contrary, it seemed made to celebrate them. Dark hair with gray strands at the temples, arranged with a precision only money and time can buy. A glass of whiskey in his hand, still full, as if he'd forgotten he was holding anything. He was looking at me. Not with surprise, not with obvious anger. With the kind of quiet, absolute attention a hunter gives to an animal that made the wrong sound at the wrong time, in a place where it shouldn't be. My chest sank a couple of centimeters inside my rib cage. The woman 2 steps from him, an older woman with a pearl necklace and hair pinned in a severe chignon, leaned toward his ear and whispered something short. 2, 3 words at most. I didn't need to hear it to understand. She was confirming for him that I was the author of the sentence. She was handing me over with the same calm as someone fulfilling a social obligation. He didn't move his face. He just blinked once, slowly, and returned the glass to a passing waiter's tray, without the waiter needing to stop, as if the waiter knew he should be nearby at that exact instant. When his arm came down, he began to cross the ballroom in my direction. He didn't walk fast. He walked like someone who knows the distance will close one way or another, that time works in his favor and always has. Each step was measured, deliberate, and each step pushed a guest slightly out of the way without his needing to ask. People moved aside before they realized they were moving aside, as if the space around him were an unwritten rule everyone knew except me. I stood up from the armchair. The case slipped from my lap, and I caught it in the air by a hair, a ridiculous shadow amid the scene forming around me. I felt my cheeks burn, felt my throat go dry in a way the glass of water in my hand wasn't going to fix, felt the icy certainty that Nonna Celia had been wrong that morning. My mouth wasn't my best inheritance. It was my greatest enemy. He stopped 3 meters from me, then 2, then 1. His eyes were dark, not black. Dark like aged whiskey, with a light inside them that didn't belong to that ballroom's lighting. Deep lines at the corners, the mark of a face that had spent years deciding things I didn't even want to imagine. "Excuse me, miss," he said, in a low voice that cut through the background noise effortlessly, without volume, as if the silence opened for it. "Could you repeat what you just said? I didn't quite hear it." He heard. He heard every syllable, every accent, every idiotic inflection of the sentence. The courtesy was the blade. The politeness was the warning. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. The word sorry reached the tip of my tongue and came back whole, ashamed of itself. I began, and my voice came out half an octave above normal, as if it had escaped through a crack. I was talking to myself. To yourself. To myself. Out loud. Apparently. He tilted his head 1 degree to the side, like someone examining a piece he hadn't yet decided whether to buy or break, but who already had an opinion about both possibilities. At that instant, a door slammed at the back of the ballroom, and a shrill voice cut through the scene like glass. "It's gone! It's gone! My necklace is gone!" Adalgisa came running in, her veil still undone, falling to one side, her neck bare where the necklace should have gleamed, her finger pointing in my direction before she'd even seen me properly. The makeup artist. It was the makeup artist. No one else went into my room. The ballroom that was already silent fell into another kind of silence. The kind that carries judgment and curiosity in equal parts. The kind that makes the room's temperature rise a degree without anyone moving. And the man in the black suit, who still hadn't told me his name, slowly turned his face toward the bride and then back to me. In his eyes there was now a new question, and I understood, too late, that he had heard every word of the sentence I never should have said, and that he still hadn't decided what he was going to do with it. Chapter 2. Hand on the Wall. I ran. It's not pretty to admit, but it's the right word. Adalgisa screamed. The entire ballroom turned to me. The security guards began walking from the side, and my legs decided on their own before my head caught up to the decision. I grabbed the case by the handle, muttered an absurd apology to no one in particular, and went out the side door of the ballroom, the one the waiters used to reach the kitchen. The service corridor had hospital white light and a smell of industrial detergent that made my eyes sting within 3 seconds. I walked fast, almost ran, the case banging against my thigh with every step, my breathing already faltering before the effort justified it. I turned at one bend, then another, tighter one, pushed a door that opened onto a smaller, darker corridor. No sign, no exit indication, with a lower ceiling and stale air as if no one had opened that door in weeks. That's where I heard it. Footsteps behind me. Not hurried. Calm, measured, the kind that knows it doesn't need to run because the corridor ends at a wall. I didn't look back. I quickened my pace. The door at the end of the corridor had a large metal key in the lock, on the wrong side, Locked from the outside, obviously, because life at that hour wasn't going to offer me any courtesy. I put my hand on the knob anyway, rattled it, felt the cold metal refuse with a firmness that felt personal. I rested my forehead against the wood for a second. The varnish was worn away at the level of my eyes. Someone before me had also reached this point without being able to get through. The footsteps stopped about 3 meters behind my back. "If you'd run a little more, you'd have hit the wall," his low voice said, unhurried. "I thought it best to let you choose whether to turn around and face me or keep your back to me." I turned. Slowly. He was 2 meters away, his jacket still impeccable, his left hand in his trouser pocket like someone waiting for an elevator. He raised his right slowly and rested it on the wall beside my face, without touching me, without pinning me, just closing off the exit path with a gesture that required no effort at all. Only presence. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. And the way he said it, direct and without ornament, made me believe him. "I just want to talk." Talk about what? About an interesting sentence I heard. A comment about mobsters past their prime. The wall at my back seemed colder than any wall had a right to be. I held the case in front of my body as if it could serve as a shield, which was ridiculous, and my mouth decided that this was the perfect time to malfunction. "Look, I said that just, without thinking, like, it wasn't about you, specifically. It was more of a general observation, a general observation. Yeah, about mobsters. In theory. In theory. In theory." He slightly arched an eyebrow. He didn't smile, but something at the corner of his mouth made a tiny movement that wasn't hatred and that I couldn't name in that cold hotel corridor. "Do you usually insult dangerous men in theory?" he asked. "Or did I have the special honor?" "I didn't. I didn't know you were you. If I'd known..." "If you'd known, you'd have done what?" I opened my mouth, closed it. The honest answer was, I'd have done exactly the same thing, because I was distracted and in a bad mood, and that's how I operate when I'm distracted and in a bad mood. And that answer clearly wasn't going to get me out of the corridor alive. I searched for another. None came out in any decent form. The case chose the worst moment to give way. The zipper I'd checked 3 times before leaving home gave out along the side seam, and one brush fell, then another, then the eyeshadow palette. Everything scattered across the cold corridor floor between my feet and his Italian shoes. I closed my eyes for half a second, breathed through my nose. When I opened them, he was crouched down, in a $1,000 suit, elbow resting on his knee, gathering my things with both hands with a deliberate patience that left me speechless. He stood up with the brushes held between his fingers like playing cards, and held them out to me. "You'll drop them again if you take them all at once," he said. "Hold out the case." I held it out. He arranged each piece in the right order, each brush in the right compartment. The palette fitted into the bottom with just enough pressure not to bend. He knew where each thing went because he looked once and memorized it, or because he had an organizing habit that didn't belong to my case, or to any mobster I'd ever imagined. He closed the zipper carefully, tested it, handed it back. "There." "Thank you," I whispered, and hated how small my voice came out. He rested his hand on the wall beside my face again, without touching. We were back to the opening scene, but the corridor seemed smaller than before, warmer, despite the stale air. His scent reached me now. Cedar, amber, something expensive and discreet that didn't need to announce itself because it had already arrived. "The bride accused you over a necklace," he said. "Yes." "Did you take the necklace?" "No." "Do you know who did?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't know. I hesitated because accusing Ottilia Wren there, with no proof, with no one on my side, with a makeup artist's word against a bridesmaid's word, was the kind of thing Nonna Celia would have called opening your mouth in the wrong place. And all morning, I'd been opening my mouth in the wrong place. He waited. He didn't pressure me. He gave no sign of impatience, no movement suggesting his time was more valuable than my silence. He just waited, his dark eyes fixed, like someone certain the answer would come. I took a deep breath. Adalgisa called me for a touch-up in the ballroom without bringing any bag. If she'd had the necklace, she'd have the necklace. And one bridesmaid, Audelie, left the room right when it disappeared. She came back later with a handbag closed too tightly to be empty. He listened to it all without moving a muscle in his face. When I finished, he blinked once, turned his head toward the corridor he'd come from, and spoke without raising his voice. Dante. A man appeared at the corner of the corridor as if he'd been there for minutes. Maybe he had been. Silent, tall, in a dark gray suit, the closed expression of someone who never had to ask for the same thing twice. He bowed his head 1 degree, just 1 degree. Boss. Have the ballroom exits locked. No one leaves. Review the cameras in the corridor by the bride's suite, the elevator, and the main ballroom. Focus on the time of the touch-up. Yes, boss. Dante disappeared in the direction opposite my escape without making a sound, and I realized I had his hand, the boss's, Orsino's, the man whose name I still hadn't heard out loud, practically brushing my shoulder without touching me. The space between his arm and my coat had the thickness of a decision. What's your name? He asked. Mireia. Belafonte. Orsino Valcanti. We both knew he wasn't introducing himself. He was making me hear out loud the name my idiotic sentence had offended half an hour before. It was a calm and absolutely clear reminder. Come, he said, and finally moved his hand away from the wall. Let's watch together. The hotel's camera room was 2 corridors ahead, behind a door with no sign that Orsino opened with a nod to the security guard sitting inside. The guard stood up so fast that the chair hit the console with a metallic sound that echoed off the small walls. Orsino didn't look at him. He pulled a chair from the corner over for me with the tip of his sole, without bending his knee, without ceremony. Sit. I sat, the case in my lap. My hands trembling so much that I had to interlace my fingers so my knees wouldn't feel it. The videos played in silence. Adalgisa entering the suite bedroom in the morning, fixing the necklace on her neck, looking at her own reflection with that face of someone who hates their own reflection, but can't stop looking. Adalgisa leaving for the touch-up, her neck already without the necklace. Adalgisa returning to the room. And 5 minutes before she came back, a silhouette in a champagne-colored dress entering the room without a veil, without guests, and leaving with a handbag closed too tightly. Ottilie. Orsino said nothing. He pointed at the screen with 2 fingers. The guard paused it. He froze Ottilie's face on the monitor, the image grainy but sufficient. Orsino looked for 3 seconds, with that attention of someone cataloging, not just seeing. Then he turned to me. You were right. I know, I whispered, without meaning to. The corner of his mouth made that minimal movement again that wasn't a smile but wanted to be. Or maybe it was just my mind searching for things that didn't exist in the face of a man who probably never needed to smile to get what he wanted. We went out to the lobby. Dante already had Adalgisa and Ottilie leaned against the marble wall of the entrance, the hotel security on one side, 2 men in black suits who clearly didn't belong to the hotel on the other. Adalgisa was screaming. Ottilie was crying with her mascara sliding down slowly. That kind of crying that seems calculated even when it's real. The necklace appeared at the bottom of her handbag as if it had crawled in there on its own. Orsino didn't approach them. He stood 3 meters away, beside me, his hand now in the inner pocket of his jacket, his face with no expression at all. There was no pleasure in it. There was only conclusion, and a huge difference between the 2 things. Do you want to file a complaint? He asked, low, just to me. Against the bride for false accusation, against the bridesmaid for the setup. I'll handle it today. I looked at Adalgisa. I looked at Ottilie. I thought about Nonna Celia waiting at home with the heater that failed on the coldest afternoons. I thought about the fee I still needed to collect. I thought about what kind of woman I wanted to be when I walked out of that lobby. I want to collect my fee, I said. And leave. No scandal. No lawsuit. Just leave. He looked at me for a second longer than the others, as if reviewing some conclusion he'd drawn earlier. Then he nodded. Dante. Boss. Miss Belafonte will receive double the agreed amount. In cash. Now. And walk her to the car. Yes, boss. Not double, I began. Double, Orsino cut in without looking at me. For the scare. I stayed quiet. I learned early from Nonna Celia when staying quiet was smarter than arguing. And in that lobby, with the white marble gleaming and Adalgisa sobbing against the wall, double the fee was two things at once. 2 extra months of medicine for my aunt, and a debt I still didn't know how to calculate. Dante handed the envelope into my hand and pointed to the revolving door. I began to walk. The marble under my shoes was cold even through the sole, and the lobby seemed bigger than when I'd entered that morning, before the bride, before the necklace, before the dead-end corridor. Before crossing through the door, I looked back one last time. Orsino was still standing in the same place, and Dante, who had returned to his side with his usual silence, tilted his head 1 degree toward the boss's ear. I was too far away to hear. But the service corridor, at the moment of being cornered, had taught me something new. Sometimes you understand without hearing. Dante said something short. Orsino answered even shorter. The two of them looked at me at the same time, and I quickened my pace to the rental car like someone fleeing a fate they already know will arrive one way or another. I only realized, when I closed the door and put the key in the ignition, that my heart was still beating to the rhythm of the corridor, and that I had no idea what kind of man I had just met. Chapter 3. The Man Who Wouldn't Leave. Monday started with reheated coffee and a long cough coming from Nonna Celia's bedroom. I got up before the sun, opened the kitchen window, and looked at the still empty street, trying to convince my own body that Saturday at the Bellaverde Hotel had been a bad dream that had already passed. It hadn't passed. The envelope with the doubled fee sat on top of the table, and every time I looked at it I remembered the way that man in the black suit had looked at me in the lobby, the way Dante Corvi had whispered something near his ear, the way the two of them had watched me leave the hotel as if they were deciding something about me without consulting me. I pushed the envelope under a dish towel and poured coffee for my aunt. You look like someone who slept with their eyes open, Nonna Celia said, sitting in the chair with the old blanket around her shoulders. Did something happen at that party? Nothing major, I lied, stirring the sugar slower than I needed to. Difficult client, missing necklace, headache. The usual. She looked at me for a second longer than I wanted, and wise as always, decided not to pull the thread. Drink your coffee, girl, and take a coat. The sky looks ugly. I grabbed the case and headed out to the Trevi salon. The sky really did look ugly, but I preferred the rain to any other conversation in that kitchen. The salon opened at 9. Ria Cavallo, my best friend since my first months at Trevi, and the hairstylist at the chair next to mine, was already inside, smoking on the sly at the back door when I arrived. 28 years old, sharp mouth, and an impressive ability to curse in Italian when the day started off wrong. Madonna Santa, she said when she saw me. You look like someone who needs whiskey, not coffee. Good morning to you too. Tell me. Later. Ah, so there is something to tell. I passed by her without answering, and started setting up my space. Brushes lined up, sponges by size, foundation separated by shade. I'd learned early that my work began with the order of the counter, because the rest of the day rarely respected any order at all. The first client came in at 9:20. A bride's mother who wanted to test a look for her daughter's wedding. She sat down, ordered coffee, and talked for 40 minutes about a second cousin who refused to come to the ceremony because of an old fight about orange cake. I listened, smiled in the right places, and worked. It was exactly the kind of morning I wanted. Ordinary, repetitive, no men in black suits. At 10:30, the door chime rang. I didn't need to turn to know. The air of the salon changed. Ria, who was washing another client's hair, raised her eyes, and her hand stopped mid-motion for a second before returning to normal. I finished spreading concealer on the bride's mother's skin before lifting my face. Orsino Valcanti was standing 3 steps from the door, in a gunmetal gray suit this time, hands at his sides, looking directly at me. Serious. Elegant. The kind of man who doesn't need to say anything to occupy an entire salon. "Good morning," he said, low. "Good morning," I answered, and hated how thin my voice sounded. "Any openings for a beard trim?" Ria dropped the spray hose and looked at me as if I'd just announced I was leaving for Nepal. "This is a women's salon," I said, brush frozen in the air. "We don't do beards." What a shame. He didn't even smile. He just kept standing there. "Then I'll wait." "Wait for what?" "For you to finish. I need to talk to you." The bride's mother, in the mirror in front of me, widened her eyes and pretended to be very interested in her own phone. She pretended so poorly you could almost hear her ears growing. "I'm working," I answered. "I noticed. That's why I'm going to wait." He sat in the waiting chair against the opposite wall, crossed one leg over the other, took his phone from the inner pocket of his jacket, and began looking at the screen as if this were any old waiting room and he were any old client. He wasn't. I spent the next 40 minutes trying to pretend my hand wasn't shaking. I applied eyeshadow, applied mascara, drew a thin line of eyeliner that came out reasonably well, despite everything. The bride's mother paid, thanked me, and before leaving looked from me to him and back to me with a raised eyebrow. I wanted to wipe off her face. When the door slammed shut behind her, the salon became dangerously similar to the silence of the Bellaverde Hotel at the moment of my insult. Ria, who was now wrapping the client's head in a towel, cleared her throat too loudly. "I'm going to get more towels from the back," she announced, to no one in particular, and vanished. I cleaned the counter just to have something to do with my hands. "What did you come here for?" I asked, without turning. "To find out if you got home safely on Saturday." I did. "Was your aunt awake?" That's when I turned. He had put the phone away. He was looking at me as if he'd been waiting for exactly that movement from me. "How do you know about my aunt?" "You mentioned a sick aunt in the corridor, before you dropped the case." I didn't remember mentioning it. He remembered. That was what scared me most about that man, more than the black suit and the power he radiated effortlessly. He kept things. "She was sleeping," I answered. "I got home fine, yes." "Good. That's it?" "No." He stood up, and the salon seemed to shrink around him. He took 3 steps and stopped on the other side of my counter, with the glass between us. "Do I still look past my prime, Miss Belafonte?" Blood rushed to my face so fast that I felt my ears burn. I already apologized. "You didn't. Then I'm apologizing now. I'm not asking for one. I'm just asking." He rested one hand on the edge of the counter. He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. My breathing had already fallen out of rhythm on its own. "You don't look past anything," I said, so low it barely came out. "Satisfied?" He tilted his head slightly. He didn't smile, but something in his eyes moved. For today, the door chime rang again. An 11 o'clock client coming in with a rush and a wet umbrella. He moved away from the counter, greeted the woman with an almost imperceptible nod of his head, and left without saying anything more. Ria reappeared the exact second the door closed. "Mireia Belafonte," she said, in the tone of someone starting an official interrogation. "You owe me a long conversation and an espresso. Later. Ma va all'inferno, later. That man came here to trim a beard that was already perfect." "He didn't trim any beard." "Exactly." I had no answer for that. I went back to arranging the brushes for the 3rd time that morning. On Tuesday, he showed up again. This time, he stayed 10 minutes at the door, said he'd only stopped by to return a credit card I'd forgotten in the case at the Bellaverde. I hadn't forgotten any card. The card was clearly an excuse. and handed me the plastic, resting it in the palm of my hand. His fingers touched mine. They stayed there a second longer than they needed to. A second too small to accuse him of anything and too big to pretend it hadn't happened. I didn't pull my hand away. Neither did he. Rhea, in the mirror next to us, left the hairdryer running without drying anything. On Wednesday, he showed up at lunchtime with 2 coffees from the cafe across the street. He put one on my counter, the other on the one beside it, and said quietly, "One for your friend, so she'll stop pretending she isn't listening." Rhea choked on her own air and had to go to the back again. On Thursday, it rained the entire afternoon. The salon emptied early. I grabbed the case, put away the brushes, and said goodbye to Rhea, who stayed to close the register. When I opened the door to my house, I took off my soaked coat on the doormat, tried to shake the rain from my hair, and heard Nonna Celia's voice from the kitchen. "Girl, there's a gentleman here in the living room." I stopped. "A what?" "A gentleman. He brought bread, a package of good coffee, and a blanket he said was for me. I told him to come in because it was raining daggers." I passed through the hallway without moving the hair from my face and saw him on my living room sofa, with my aunt's coffee cup in his hands. Serious as always, dark suit damp at the shoulders despite the coat hanging on the coat rack at the entrance. On the low table, a package of fresh bread, a bag of whole bean coffee of a brand I could never afford, and a plaid blanket still with the tag on. Nonna Celia was sitting in the armchair beside him, smiling like I hadn't seen her smile in months. "She's home," my aunt announced, satisfied, as if introducing the main attraction of the theater. "I'm home," I repeated, dry. "Good evening, Mr. Velcanti." "Not Mr. Velcanti." He stood up and rested the cup on the table with an almost absurd care for the size of his hands. "Orsino, you're getting my rug wet. I apologize." "You'll forgive me, Mireia," my aunt interjected, in the tone she'd used since I was 10, and she thought I was being rude. I was the one who insisted he come in. The young man came to drop off a package. It was raining. I wasn't going to send him away. "He's not a young man, Auntie." "Better. Young men are unpredictable." Orsino, to my dismay, almost smiled. It didn't quite become a smile, but the corner of his mouth moved in a way I'd never forget. And Nonna Celia noticed, because Nonna Celia noticed everything. "He's staying for coffee," my aunt decided, as if it were a decision of the state. "Auntie, he brought the coffee. He leaves with the coffee, and what are we going to do? Drink water?" I closed my eyes for a second. When I opened them, he had already sat back down, and my aunt was already asking whether he preferred sugar or sweetener. I sat in the chair farthest from the room and forced myself to breathe. Over the next 20 minutes, Nonna Celia adopted Orsino Velcanti as if he were a nephew lost in a distant war. She asked where his family came from, where his accent came from, whether he ate well, slept well, took care of his liver. He answered everything in a low voice, with a patience I never would have imagined in him after what I'd seen at the Bella Verde. He didn't answer what he did for a living. She didn't ask. I got the impression she knew, and pretended she didn't know, because she decided right there that it didn't matter. When he finally stood up to leave, Nonna Celia extended her hand from the armchair, and he bent down to kiss her fingers as if he were in another decade. "Come back," my aunt said, "without a package. Just you." I walked him to the door in silence. I grabbed the wet coat from the rack and handed it to him without looking directly into his eyes. "Thank you for the bread," I said, because I had to say something. "Thank you for the coffee." She was the one who offered it. I know. He already had one foot out the door when the phone in his inner pocket rang. He answered on the first ring, still standing in my doorway, and I saw his face change. It wasn't a big movement. It was a hardening of the jaw, a narrowing of the eyes. Something I'd seen in men from my past before something bad happened. He moved the phone away from his mouth for half a second, looked at me and said low, "Lock the door tonight. Lock them all. What happened?" Just lock them, Mireya. He put the phone back to his ear, went down the 3 steps of my garden, got into the dark car parked across the street, which I hadn't seen before, and which I suspected had been there for hours, and vanished into the rain. I closed the door, turned the key, turned the deadbolt, pushed the handle to check. From the living room, my aunt's voice. "Girl, what are you doing with that lock?" I rested my forehead against the wood and didn't answer. I stayed there as long as I needed, listening to the rain beat on the porch roof, trying to understand why his face had changed so much between one sentence of the phone call and the next, and why the word lock in his mouth had sounded like a warning of something already coming. Chapter 4. Rocco. Friday. A whole week after the reheated coffee of Monday morning, and there was still something missing inside my chest for me to be able to say I was calm. Orsino hadn't come back to my house since the night of the rain. He'd shown up at the salon twice, always brief, always attentive, always with a question that wasn't exactly a question. He asked once whether Nonna Celia was eating well. He asked another time whether I'd been leaving alone at night. "I do," I'd answered, dry, tucking my hair behind my ear, like I always have. He hadn't commented. He just looked at me for a few seconds, with that look of someone calculating something they wouldn't yet reveal, and left without anything more. The salon was left with the smell of cold coffee and the silence of someone waiting for a sentence that never came. That Friday, the salon closed at 9. Ria left before me, saying she had dinner with a cousin, and that if I needed anything, I should just call. I stayed finishing the register alone, with the muffled noise of the street coming through the closed shutters and the smell of acetone and cold wax the salon always had after hours. That smell I no longer noticed, so used to it, but which that night seemed stronger, more present, as if the space itself were holding its breath. I put the money in the envelope, locked the drawer, and turned off the lights in the main salon before going out the side door, which opened directly onto the back parking lot. It was cold. The kind of cold Chicago imposes on the weekend, cutting and damp, with the asphalt still dark and shiny from the puddles the afternoon rain had left. My rental car was on the other side of the parking lot, under the only street lamp that worked, and I walked toward it with the case in one hand and the key in the other, the heels of my shoes echoing on the wet concrete in a rhythm that seemed too loud for such an empty place. I was halfway there when I heard it. Mireya. My whole body stopped before my brain registered why. It was a voice I hadn't heard in 4 years, a voice I had sworn, in silence, while unpacking 2 suitcases and calling a taxi, that I'd never hear again. I turned slowly. Rocco Landi was leaning against the hood of my rental car, with a bottle of something brown in his hand and a smell of alcohol so strong you could feel it 2 meters away. He was thinner than I remembered, his face more worn, the dark circles under his eyes deep as if he hadn't slept right in weeks, his collar open, hair stuck to his forehead from sweat despite the cold. He seemed smaller than I kept in my memory. Or maybe I'd grown bigger. "Rocco. I came to talk. We have nothing to talk about." "We do." He took a step to the side of the hood, the bottle swinging in his hand. "We have money to talk about." I held the case tighter than I needed to. I felt the cold metal of the latch against my palm, the rough edge of the clasp pressing my fingers like a reminder that I was still here, still standing. "I don't have money to give you." "You do. I saw it. You worked that fancy event last week. Everyone talked about it. The makeup artist for the Vernon wedding. Tell me you didn't get paid well." "It's none of your business." "It is." He advanced 2 steps. I stepped back 1. "It was with you that I paid rent for 4 years. It was with me that you learned to do that pretty little eyeliner the rich people love. It was my car that took you to your first weddings. It was my name that introduced you at your first salons. You owe me." "I don't owe you anything." "Oh, you do." He advanced 2 more steps, and now he was close enough for me to smell the breath of cheap booze mixed with the cold of the night. I tried to step back again, and my back hit the side wall of the salon. The plaster was damp and cold through my coat, and the air vanished from my lungs in a way that had nothing to do with the wind. "I don't have what you want," I said, in the firmest voice I could invent at that moment. "And if you don't leave here now, I'm going to scream." "Scream." He laughed, a short, ugly laugh that didn't come close to his eyes. "There's no one here. I already checked." He reached out and grabbed my arm above the elbow. He squeezed with a strength I knew, with an old and familiar pressure that made me feel sick. My case fell to the ground. One of the latches opened and some brushes rolled across the wet asphalt, stopping at different angles under the distant light of the street lamp, like details of a scene I didn't want to be living. "Let go. Only after we talk. Let go." A shadow moved from the right side of the parking lot so fast that I didn't see it happen. I only saw Rocco gasp suddenly, his arm coming off me, his body spun and pinned against the wall beside me, with his face pressed to the plaster, and a firm forearm at the base of his neck. Dante, Orsino's man, silent as someone who'd spent his life learning to occupy spaces without being noticed. Lethal. That dry humor he sometimes let slip completely absent at that moment. "Good evening," Dante said, almost politely, his forearm unshakable against Rocco's neck. "You must be Mr. Landy." Rocco tried to answer. Only a wheeze came out. Calm footsteps coming from the other side of the parking lot. I didn't need to turn. I knew. Orsino appeared under the street lamp's light in a black suit that absorbed the shadow around it, his hands at his sides, his face so still, it was scary just to look at. He walked toward us with that calm I'd already begun to understand wasn't patience. It was the opposite of that. It was a man calculating with millimeter precision every second of what was going to happen next, carrying with him the entire weight of a decision he'd made long before entering that parking lot. He stopped 1 meter from Rocco. He looked at my arm. There was a red mark beginning to form where the fingers had squeezed, and my coat had ridden up a bit on my shoulder. He looked at that mark for a time that seemed long to me. The muscles in his jaw tightened once, subtle, almost imperceptible. Then he looked at Dante. "Handle it," he said, very low. Dante adjusted his position, his forearm lowering slightly to get the angle right. That's when my voice came back. "No." All three of them looked at me at the same time. Rocco blinked, confused, thinking for a second that I was defending him. I wasn't. I was defending something much bigger than him. "He lets go of my ex," I said, looking directly at Orsino. "You don't decide that for me." "Mireia." "No." I lifted my chin. I was trembling, my arm burning, the brushes scattered on the asphalt behind me. I didn't care. I spent 4 years with this man treating me like a thing. I'm not going to spend one more second with any other man treating him like a thing in the name of what happened to me. I'm not anyone's property, Orsino. Not his. Not yours. The silence that formed in the parking lot was different from any silence I'd ever witnessed near that man. It wasn't the elegant silence of the Belle Verde, with crystal and background music, and the sense that the world kept turning somewhere else. It was the silence of a man who wasn't used to being interrupted processing, in real time, the fact that he'd been interrupted, and trying to figure out what to do with it. Orsino looked at Dante. He made a tiny gesture with 2 fingers, almost imperceptible. Dante loosened his arm slowly. He didn't let go right away. He slid his hand to Rocco's shoulder and held him firmly there, without the weight from before. The same strength, now toned down 2 notches, like someone waiting for a new order. "Speak," Orsino told me, without taking his eyes off my ex. "What do you want to happen to him?" I inhaled deeply. The wet air of the parking lot scraped my throat, and I let it in all the way to the bottom of my lungs before answering. "I want him to answer for his debts, all of them. The ones from my time and the ones after, to the real police. Not yours." Orsino raised his eyes to me. "Do you know what you're asking?" "I do. I'm asking for justice, not revenge." He stared at me for a time I couldn't measure. His eyes traveled over my face as if reading something written there, something he still hadn't fully deciphered. I held the look. My hands were trembling, and I held it anyway. "Dante," he said finally, without releasing my gaze. "Mr. Landy has an envelope of notes in my office. Deliver him and the envelope to the central precinct. The clean one, not ours." "The clean one," Dante repeated, with no irony at all, just confirming the order so there would be no room for doubt. "Do it." "Yes, boss." Dante pulled Rocco by the shoulder, turned him, and began leading him toward a car parked farther ahead, in the dark part of the parking lot where the street lamp didn't reach. Rocco tried to struggle once, his body resisting on instinct. He looked at me over his shoulder, and I didn't look away. He gave up before I gave up. When the car disappeared around the corner, and the sound of the engine dissolved into the street, the parking lot was left with only the sound of my own breathing and the slow dripping of some wet gutter up high. The cold reached me again for good, now that the adrenaline no longer served as a coat. Orsino didn't come closer. He stayed where he was, 1.5 meters from me, as if respecting a line I'd drawn without words. "How did you know?" I asked, my voice coming out thinner than I wanted. "How did you know he was coming today?" "I've known since Monday." "Monday?" "The phone call at your door. That was it." That landed on my chest with a weight that took me 2 seconds to fully understand. "You knew since Monday and didn't tell me." "No." "Why?" He looked at his own shoe for a second before answering. It was the first time I'd seen Orsino Valcanti truly hesitate in front of me, without irony, without the elegant shield he normally kept in place. "Because I thought I'd solve it before it reached you. Alone." "Yes." I laughed. It wasn't a pretty laugh. It was dry, almost angry, with my arm aching and my heart completely out of rhythm. "My father used to do that," I said. And my voice went quieter than I expected, not weaker, just deeper. "Decide alone. Thought it was protection. On the day he decided to leave with a younger woman, he also thought he was protecting me from some truth I couldn't handle. You know what I couldn't handle, Orsino? It wasn't him leaving. It was him deciding alone that I didn't deserve to be consulted." The parking lot went quiet in a different way. Not the silence of danger. The silence of afterward, when the adrenaline begins to drop and only what's real is left, and what's real has edges and weight and doesn't ask permission to hurt. "I'm not your father." "You're not." I lifted my chin again, though my legs wanted to betray me at that exact moment. "But today you did exactly what he did. Decided for me before asking. If you want to be around, and at this point I'm tired of pretending I don't want you around, you're going to have to ask first. Always. 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 Deal." I didn't expect him to accept so fast. I didn't expect him to not even try to argue or explain or find a loophole. I was left with no ready answer, and the silence between us became something completely different from everything that had filled that parking lot in the last few minutes. Softer, more frightening, in a totally different way. He took a step. Just one. Stopped. "May I come closer?" I almost laughed again, this time from relief, the kind that hurts a little on the way out. "You may." He closed the distance slowly, with the same deliberate calm as always, but without the coldness that normally accompanied it. He stopped a hand's breadth from me. He didn't touch me. He just stood there, looking at my arm where the red mark was already beginning to darken slightly on the skin, and then looking at my face with an attention that made me want to look away and not be able to. "You're trembling." "I am." "From fear of him or anger at me?" "Both," he nodded, slowly, as if that were the fairest answer I could have given, and he knew it. He didn't try to correct it. He didn't try to explain again. He just kept that answer, whole, without trimming the edges. He extended his hand between the two of us, palm turned up and fingers slightly open. He didn't take mine. He just offered it, leaving the space there, waiting. "Come, just until you stop trembling." I looked at his hand. I looked at my rental car, with the brushes scattered on the wet asphalt. I looked at the parking lot gate, where Rocco had disappeared into Dante's car, taking with him 4 years of things I needed to leave behind for good. And after everything I'd sworn to myself about older men, about protection that turns into control, about never again confusing the two things, I placed my cold hand on top of his hand. He didn't close his fingers. He stayed still, palm open, leaving the choice entirely to me. I closed mine. Chapter 5. Surrender. Orsino's car was too silent. The kind of silence that didn't come from the expensive engine or the dark leather upholstery cold beneath my thighs, but from the man at the wheel, firm hands, gaze fixed on the wet road, jaw clenched in a way I'd already learned to recognize over the last few weeks. He was holding himself back, and I, in the passenger seat, still with the taste of the fear of Rocco in my mouth and my arms wrapped around my own body, didn't know whether I wanted him to keep holding back or not. "Where are we going?" I asked, low. "To a place where you can stop trembling without anyone watching." It wasn't a question, but it wasn't an order either. It was a sentence placed in the middle, in the exact measure of what he was learning to do with me. I looked through the window and saw Chicago pass in stripes of orange and white light. The city seemed quieter at that hour, almost respectful, as if it knew I'd just yelled at 2 dangerous men in a single night and needed a few kilometers of silence to understand what I'd done. The penthouse was at the top of an old restored building, in a neighborhood I'd never have the courage to cross alone without a very good reason. The private elevator opened directly onto a vestibule with dark marble floors, a single amber light fixture on the ceiling, and the discreet smell of wood and something clean I couldn't identify. He went in first, turned on a low light in the living room, took off his jacket, and put it on the back of a chair like someone shedding a second skin. Underneath, the white shirt was slightly wrinkled at the shoulders. It was the most human detail I'd seen in him. "Water?" he asked. "Please." He went to the open-plan kitchen, dark marble counter, no ornaments, everything in the right place, and came back with a glass. He didn't hand it to me directly. He just placed the glass in front of me on the side table and stepped back 2 full steps. I noticed, with a strange tightness in my chest, that he was giving me physical space on purpose, as if he knew I needed a margin before anything else. I took the glass with both hands. They were still shaking. "There's a blanket on the armchair," he said, pointing with his chin to a dark armchair near the window. "Grab it. Come to the terrace." The terrace was enormous, all enclosed with tinted glass from floor to ceiling, with a view of the lake and the constellation of lit windows of the loop. The wind outside cushioned against the glass. You could feel the cold without it actually reaching you. I sat in a low wicker chair, wrapped the blanket around my shoulders, and looked at the river of lights below. He leaned against the railing, his back to the city, looking at me with that look that asked permission for nothing. "I almost decided today," he said. I raised my eyes. "I almost had Dante take Rocco to a place where he'd never bother you again." His voice came out low, without drama, like someone reporting a fact. "I almost decided for you, without asking." I gripped the blanket a little tighter. The fabric was thick, warm, and smelled of the same discreet perfume from the vestibule. "I almost let you," I answered. He closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, there was something different in his face. Something tired, human, almost beautiful in a way that disarmed me before I could prepare. "That's why I can't," he continued. "If I decide for you once, I decide for you forever. And if you let me once, you let me forever. I know men who did that with their women." His voice dropped even lower. "They're not men I want to be." I stayed quiet. The glass of water was ice cold in my palms. On the way, I'd rehearsed 1,000 harsh sentences in case he tried to boss me around again. None of them fit. "Why do you keep coming?" I asked, and the question came out before I had permission for it. "At the salon, at my house, now here. You're the most feared mobster in Chicago, Orsino. There's no shortage of women who want to be chosen by you. He took a while to answer. He lifted his chin a bit, looked at the lake, turned his eyes back to me. Because none of them saw me. What do you mean? They saw the money, the power, what I could do for them, or with them. His voice was hoarse in a new way, a way I hadn't heard before. You saw me old, offended me, kept trembling and kept talking back. You saw me as a man, Mireya. It was the first time in a long time. I didn't know what to do with that. I looked at the glass. I looked at his feet, dark, expensive shoes, completely still on the terrace floor. I looked at my own lap. I breathed deep once, and then again. My father left when I was 15, I began, and my voice came out firmer than I expected. He left for a 22-year-old woman, pretended for months that everything was fine, decided everything alone, and on a Saturday morning, grabbed a suitcase and said, "We'll talk later." We never talked later. He didn't interrupt. He didn't move. Since that day, I look at any older man and I see that suitcase. I see my mother sitting in the kitchen not knowing what to do with her own body. I see my aunt giving up her life to come take care of us. I breathe deep. So, when you show up in a black suit and solve everything without asking, I see the suitcase, Orsino. I see the suitcase before I see you. He brought a hand to his face and ran his fingers over his temple. The most tired gesture I'd seen in him, and in the faces of few people in my life. "What do you want?" he asked, and the question had a weight that filled the whole terrace. "Really, Mireya, from life. Not from what I can give you. From what you want." I laughed a little, without humor, and the sound came out smaller than I wanted. A studio with my name on the door, and an aunt who sleeps peacefully. That's all. I'll finance it. No. Why not? Because then the sign will have my name hidden behind yours, I answered, looking directly at him. I want to buy every letter of that sign with money I earned. He smiled. It was a small smile, almost invisible against the low light of the terrace, but I saw it clearly. And I understood, with a silent shock that wouldn't fit in the chest of any sensible person, that he was smiling because I'd refused, not despite it. "All right," he said. "All right? All right. You buy the sign. I buy breakfast." He rose from the railing slowly. He took 2 steps to my chair and stopped. He stood there, tall, the wind outside the glass unable to reach him, without extending his hand. I looked up. The terrace light caught the wrong angle and cast a shadow on the line of his jaw. "I'm not going to touch you unless you ask," he said low. "You have to say it out loud." My chest rose and fell twice before I could open my mouth. The blanket slipped off one shoulder. I didn't pull it back. "Touch me." He touched me. It wasn't a hungry kiss. It was the opposite of that. His hand came slowly to the nape of my neck, his fingers opening between the strands of my hair with a delicacy I didn't expect from a man with the hands he had. His mouth found mine like someone surrendering after a war that had gone on too long. He didn't take me. He gave himself over. And I, with both hands still gripping the glass of water, felt for the first time in many years that I was being chosen without being traded for anything. He pulled back enough for me to see his eyes up close, the dark brown I'd already memorized without meaning to. "Do you want to stay?" he asked. "I want to stay." He took the glass from my hand, placed it on the side table, and lifted me by the hand without any rush. The living room was quiet around us. The bedroom door was at the end of a short hallway with light-colored flooring, and every step I took down that hallway was conscious, mine, entirely chosen. He opened the door, let me go in first, went in after. He closed the door behind us. The door closed softly behind us, and the room on the other side went quiet, holding only the light of the terrace, still on, that no one turned off. The next morning's light came through the cracks of the dark curtain, drawing thin, oblique stripes on the wooden floor. I woke slowly, not knowing where I was for exactly 3 seconds. The wrong ceiling, the wrong silence, the pillow with a scent different from mine. And then I recognized it. His shirt. I was dressed in his shirt, white, too big, with the cuffs going past my fingers and the fabric warm against my skin. I sat up in bed and looked around. The bedroom was simpler than I'd expected for a man of his stature. A wide bed with gray sheets, a dark armchair in a corner, a large window with the curtain almost closed, no paintings on the walls, no ornaments. It was the bedroom of someone who slept there, not of someone who showed their bedroom to people. I found him in the kitchen, leaning against the marble counter with a cup in his hand, his hair still damp from a shower, a dark gray t-shirt and sweatpants. Without the suit, without the collared shirt, without the jacket, he looked 10 years younger and 1,000 times more dangerous, because that was what almost no one in Chicago had the right to see. He raised his eyes when I appeared in the kitchen doorway. The corner of his mouth went up 1 degree. A little, but enough for me to feel it even in my knees and decide to pretend I hadn't felt it. "Coffee?" he asked. "Coffee." He poured a cup without asking how I took it, and got it right. Black. No sugar. I don't know how he knew. Maybe he'd paid attention on the days he showed up at the salon asking for a beard trim he probably didn't need. The phone vibrated on the counter. He looked at the display and handed it to me without saying anything. "It's your aunt." I answered, already blushing, before I pressed the screen. "Nonna. Good morning, my girl." Her voice was sarcastic and cheerful at the same time. Her usual tone, the one that fooled no one. "Tell me something. Is the mobster still there?" I looked at him. He was pretending he wasn't listening to every syllable. He was listening. "He is," I answered low. "Good. Tell him that if he hurts you, I'll hit him with my cane. And tell him I want pão de queijo for lunch." I hung up before dying of embarrassment. I put the phone on the counter with unnecessary care. He had the corner of his mouth raised, the cup frozen in the air halfway. "What did she say?" "That she's going to hit you with her cane if you hurt me." "Fair. And that she wants pão de queijo for lunch." "Also fair." He took a step toward me, set his own cup on the counter calmly, and stood in front of me looking into my eyes with a new seriousness. Different from the seriousness of the suit. Different from the seriousness of the terrace railing. It was a morning seriousness, with no armor underneath. "Open the studio, Belafonte," he said low, "with your name on the door. And let me be the first breakfast client next door." I closed my eyes for a second. I heard the refrigerator humming quietly, heard the wind outside trying to get in through the kitchen window without succeeding. When I opened them, he was still there, waiting for an answer, as if it really were up to me to give it, as if none of it had been decided before I spoke. "All right," I answered. He smiled. A whole smile this time, hiding nothing. And for the first time in many years, I looked at the face of an older man and saw no suitcase at all. Chapter 6. Belafonte on the door. 2 weeks passed as if someone had sped up the clock on purpose. The 3 elite brides who'd been at the Bella Verde that night decided, without arranging it among themselves, that I was the makeup artist they needed to have in their schedule before someone else grabbed her. I signed contracts that paid 3 months' rent for a small space in Lakeview. A cramped room with a large window facing the street, exactly what I'd designed in my head years before without believing it was real. Ria left Trevi a few days later, saying in Italian that if I opened without her, she'd break my case. I accepted on the spot. The sign arrived on a Tuesday morning, wrapped in brown paper, heavier than I expected. Dark wood, wine-colored letters, a single surname in the center. Belafonte. I stood on the sidewalk with the box in my arms longer than I should have, because my throat tightened in a way that had nowhere to escape. The sun struck the street from the side, and the reflection of the letters flickered for a second before I could take my eyes off it. I paid and counted cash, with a steady hand, and forced the vendor to give me a receipt on letterhead. I kept the folded receipt inside my wallet as if it were a birth certificate. Maybe it was. On opening day, I woke before the sun. The apartment was still dark and silent, and I stood for a moment at the edge of the bed, listening to the low sound of Chicago waking up outside, a distant bus, a pigeon on the windowsill, the building's old plumbing making one of its usual clicks. Nonna Celia was sitting in the kitchen when I came down, in the blue dress she kept for weddings, leaning on her cane, her hair combed with a delicacy she rarely gave herself. The red lipstick, discreet but exact, was in place as if she'd spent hours getting it right. "Are you sure you can walk all the way there?" I asked. "I'll walk to hell if it's to see the studio of yours." We both laughed, and the sound inside the kitchen seemed larger than the room allowed. She held my hand for a second before letting go quickly, because Nonna Celia never lingered long in affection, as if too much intimacy would break some tacit agreement she had with herself. Orsino's car appeared at the corner when we left the house. It didn't stop. Didn't open its window. It just followed us from a distance, in silence, down the whole Lakeview street, its dark bodywork gliding slowly on the wet morning asphalt, like a shadow choosing to be near without being on top. Nonna Celia noticed and smiled at the tinted glass on the outside, slowly, with that small smile she reserved for the things she approved of without wanting to say so out loud. "He's learned," she commented quietly. "He's learned," I answered. Ria was at the studio door when we arrived, with a tray of coffees she'd prepared herself, and a tissue in her hand, ready for the crying she already knew was coming. 2 of the Bella Verde guests, now my clients, showed up with flowers, pink gerberas and a bunch of lavender that left the entrance air with a gentle, clean perfume, the kind that seems like a promise fulfilled before it's even made. 2 other new clients showed up without being called, as if the day had spread word on its own. The studio's storefront gleamed with the morning sun, and the sign up there looked bigger than I'd remembered when I chose the font. Nonna Celia stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, looked at the sign, and cried for the first time in front of me in 13 years. It wasn't a loud cry. It was the silent kind that slides down without the person noticing. And she stood looking up with her eyes shining, her cane firm on the ground, her jaw clenched as if it were possible to hold it back. "Your mother would have liked to see this," was all she said. I hugged her tight, my face in her hair, smelling the rosewater scent she'd always worn. That Sunday smell. Of childhood. Of things that remain even when everything else changes. Ria joined the hug without asking permission and without apologizing. The 3 of us stayed there, in front of the door of the Belafonte studio, until the morning client tapped on the glass with 2 delicate fingers. The day came in through the door with her, and didn't stop after that. Chair occupied, coffee brewing, Ria shouting the name of a brush in Italian, a bride in the mirror, then another, then the afternoon light already striking the counter differently. Orsino arrived last, a wine-colored suit, this time, not black. He stood on the sidewalk across the street, hand in his pocket, his shoulder leaning lightly against the traffic signal post. He didn't try to come in. He didn't try to appear in the photos Ria took with her phone raised above her head. He didn't send a message. He just watched. With that expression I was still learning to read. His eyes serious, his jaw calm, his whole body still in a way that in him never seemed like passivity, but a deliberate choice to occupy less space than he was capable of occupying. I finished with the last client of the day near the end of the afternoon. The sunlight was already orange, long in the windows, and the studio had that good smell of work done, foundation, a client's perfume, cold coffee forgotten on the counter. Ria made me take off my apron. Nonna Celia made me put on red lipstick before leaving. I went out, crossed the street, and stopped in front of him. Chicago's cold wind made the hem of my coat beat against my thighs, and he didn't move, just waited. "Did you stay here all day?" I asked. "Not all day. I came back 3 times. "Why didn't you come in?" "Because the day is yours." I looked at him. He had that contained expression I already knew how to decipher, the one of someone feeling more than they were showing, the kind of restraint that cost real effort, and that he still thought went unnoticed. I don't want an owner, Orsino. I know. I want you. He took a second before answering. He raised his hand slowly and ran his thumb lightly over my cheek in the same paused way he had on the terrace, as if he always had time, as if hurry were something that didn't reach him when he was near me. I know. He kissed me right there, in front of the studio door on the Lakeview Street, with Ria shouting something in Italian from the other side of the glass that I chose not to translate. It wasn't long. It was the kiss of someone who had already surrendered before, and was now just confirming out loud what they both already knew. That night, my kitchen smelled of garlic, bread, and the heater turned on low. Nonna Celia was in her chair, telling for the fourth time the story of when she met my grandfather at a wedding in a little town in the Italian countryside. The story changed details every time, and I never corrected her, because each version seemed true in its own way. Orsino was next to the counter, with his shirt sleeves rolled up to the elbow, cutting bread into thick slices with an old knife of my mother's. He cut without rushing, with a concentration that seemed disproportionate for the task, as if it were an act that required the same care as anything else he decided to do. I went to the sink to wash a glass. The warm water ran over my fingers, and I looked through the little kitchen window at the dark backyard outside, the hose coiled on its hook, the crooked wicker chair Nonna Celia never threw away, the yellow light from the neighbor's post cutting across the fence with a thin shadow. For a second, just a second, I thought Orsino still had things he didn't tell. Not out of bad faith, just out of an old habit of carrying weight in silence, of deciding before asking, of protecting thinking that protecting was the same as sparing. Men like him take years to unlearn that. And I knew, from a place that still hurt a little, that this unlearning wasn't guaranteed just because the love was real. The thought passed the way things you don't yet need to resolve that night pass. I dried my hands on the towel, turned, and went back to the table. Orsino raised his eyes from the bread and looked at me in a way I felt in the pit of my stomach, quiet, firm, with that presence he had of occupying the room without needing to move. "What is it?" he asked. "Nothing." "Liar." I laughed. I sat next to him on the high stool at the counter, my knee touching his at the edge. I rested my shoulder against his shoulder, slowly, like someone choosing a place to land and deciding to stay. Nonna Celia continued the story as if she hadn't noticed either of those things, but she noticed, because Nonna Celia noticed everything and pretended not to notice as a form of respect. "Pass the bread," I asked. He passed it. My fingers touched his for a second longer than they needed to. Across the table, my aunt laughed to herself, to no one in particular, with the glass of water in her hand and the cane leaning against the chair. And I let that second last.